back to the deep dive. You know our mission. Take your sources, cut through the noise, find the insights. Think of it as your shortcut to getting really informed, hopefully with some surprising stuff along the way. Today, we're jumping into part 2 of this source material called the Palantir Canon. It describes this really complex system, framing it as, fundamental to how the modern world works.
That's right. And the source uses this metaphor, a cathedral with 33 layers, or degrees. In part 1, we covered degrees 0 to 3, cracking open the stained glass illusions, as the source puts it. Basically, the spell of screens, media, the sort of digital priesthood scripting reality.
Okay, got it. So part 2, the source says this isn't just more of the same, right? It calls it a descent.
Exactly, a descent. Like breaking through the floor into darker regions of this cathedral structure, it focuses specifically on degrees 4, 5, and 6. And here, Palantir isn't just presented as, a tech company. It's framed as infrastructure for omniscience.
Infrastructure for omniscience.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, like a global scaffolding connecting war rooms, investments, disease outbreaks, voter patterns, even personal habits, all into one model. It calls it one mirror.
One mirror, and the source claims this mirror got turned back on the people who built it.
That's the core argument developing here. So our deep dive today is all about exploring what this source claims about degrees 4, 5, and 6. We're looking at what it calls the vault, that's degree 4, then war, degree 5, and finally the spell, or captured sovereign, which is degree 6.
And we're sticking strictly to what's in the text you've given us, exploring the ideas and examples it presents.
Precisely. The source argues that, in its view, understanding Palantir this way is understanding the command architecture of the Fourth Industrial Age. It presents this not just as information, but as doctrine.
Okay, doctrine. Got it. Let's jump in then. Let's explore what the source claims about these deeper layers.
All right, degree 4. The source calls it the vault. And the subtitle is The Financial Cathedral Value as Weapon. What's the main idea here, according to the text? Well, the source argues that the collapse, or maybe unraveling is a better word, of this global control grid it describes wasn't accidental. It claims it was planned, executed degree by degree. And degree 4 supposedly exposes this hidden architecture of control built right into global finance. Money becomes message, is how it puts it. And control was achieved by calculating what you'd value, how you'd vote, where you'd obey.
And when you'd break.
Exactly. It labels it cognitive capture by code. Pretty chilling stuff.
Spellcraft with a spreadsheet is another phrase the source uses. Vivid. And right at the center of this, it points to 2 specific systems. Palantir, of course, and BlackRock's ALADDIN.
Right. This is where it starts connecting specific entities. ALADDIN, the source claims, oversees this vast sum, over $20 trillion in assets. It functions supposedly as a financial command scaffolding, interfacing with defense, energy, real estate, pension funds, even sovereign risk.
And the source says it didn't just assess value.
No, it claims ALADDIN imposed value, suggesting it could simulate financial collapses or, game out the potential for riots.
Heavy claims. And Palantir. What was its role in this financial cathedral, according to the source?
Palantir wasn't passive either, apparently. While ALADDIN forecast capital, Palantir, using its Gotham and Foundry platforms, was forecasting people. It allegedly pulled data from, everywhere. Defense, energy, pharma, voter flows, behavioral health. The source makes this stark claim. The mirror saw not just where you were, but where your belief would break.
So not just predicting.
The source claims together they didn't just predict the world, they authored it.
Authored it. Okay, so who does the source say was behind these systems? Who's running this cathedral?
It lists what it calls the priesthood of the pyramid. It's quite a list. Major asset managers, BlackRock, Vanguard, State Street controlling most of the market, it claims. Ivy League schools, Harvard, Yale, Stanford, accused of laundering legitimacy via endowments.
Laundering legitimacy.
Yeah. And the Bank for International Settlements, the BIS, issuing policy in private. NGOs like Open Society, Rockefeller, Ford, offering cover for capture, according to the source. Sovereign funds, Saudi PIF, China's CIC merging autocracy with ESG. And even the Vatican Bank holding, quote, untouchable, untracked trillions.
Wow. And this all runs through shell companies, pensions, lobbying, ESG circles?
That's the network the source describes.
Yeah.
And then it makes this really pointed claim about COVID-19.
Right, that it exposed the system's true spine. How does the source explain that?
Okay, so according to this text, Palantir got deeply embedded in HHS Protect in the U.S. during the pandemic. Publicly, it was about health data tracking, right?
Mm-hmm.
But the source claims it was actually a full-spectrum behavioral command grid.
Behavioral command grid?
Yeah. It allegedly tracked vaccine rollout, resistance clusters, psychological compliance points, even protest probability. Palantir mapped the emotional economy, the source asserts. And ALADDIN apparently responded by directing investment to compliant states, modeling bailouts based on narrative risk.
Narrative risk?
And it claims countries that didn't play ball lost liquidity. And ESG DEI became, well, the source calls it a sacrament, a weapon of compliance.
So the vault wasn't just storage, but censorship, like financial censorship.
That's the implication, yes. Funding is reward, blacklisting is silent exile, debt ratios replacing speech laws, basically.
Yeah.
The source even loops in historical names, Rothschild, Warburg, Rockefeller, claiming they shifted from bankers to global architects, embedding influence through foundations and trusts.
But then the source talks about this mirror turn, a critical moment. What does that mean in this narrative?
But what's fascinating here is the source claims the system wasn't just shut down from outside.
Right.
Instead, it alleges that figures it calls white hats kind of walk into it. It points to specific executive orders under Trump 13881 on asset seizure, 13848 on foreign interference, 13959 on foreign influence lockdown. The source frames these as setting a trap within the system.
A trap.
Yeah, and claims that when Palantir subsequently flipped, that's the source's term, the vault, the data was no longer secure for the original operators.
So this alleged flip meant offshore flows lit up, ESG linked to PSYOPs, COVID funding tied to election interference.
According to the source, yes. And even entities like Rothschild and Rockefeller funds cross-indexed with Chinese military and Israeli defense startups. Quite the claim.
And Palantir recorded it all, but ALADDIN didn't know it was being watched.
Exactly. So degree 4 in this narrative is that moment the spell of value was broken because the eye turned inward.
Okay. Degree 4 also mentions contracts as chains. What's the claim about the legal system here?
Right. The source says the deepest layer wasn't just finance, it was the legal grid. Contracts as shackles. It talks about supranational contracts, IMF mandates, climate accords, vaccine indemnity waivers, seeing them not just as documents, but coded spells.
Code spells.
Yeah, the financial scaffolding of control. And it claims Palantir tracked things like embedded ESG-DEI clauses in these contracts, secret procurement schedules, supply chain deals, even synchronized language across global bodies, and used predictive legal models to simulate civil unrest linked to these contracts.
And the source makes that sweeping claim. Every major collapse had a contract behind it, citing Dutch farmers and climate pacts, Canadian truckers and emergency acts.
Right, and African nations facing sanctions via health compacts. It claims these weren't isolated events, but pattern-mapped mechanisms. And again, the flip narrative. When Palantir allegedly flipped, these contracts became evidence, not commerce.
Exposing links between Israeli cyber firms and Unit 8200 IP reuse, Chinese entities repackaging NIH research, BlackRock indices as compliance scores.
That's what the source claims was revealed. Even WEE as affiliated firms building AI adjudication models using Palantir data.
The language is intense. Every contract now glows with intent. Every clause is now a crime scene. The financial cathedral prosecuting control, not printing it.
And it expands on this with the weaponized ledger, arguing the Federal Reserve from 1913 was key in controlling energy via the illusion of value, debt, choice. Linking it again to those historical names, Rothschild, Rockefeller, Vatican Bank, City of London, calling them fractals of a single network.
And the dollar itself described as spellcraft, a symbolic battery, Masonic icons, privately printed, publicly enforced debt, backed by belief.
Exactly. An agreement, the source says, managed through SWIFT, rating agencies, sovereign funds, the IMF, World Bank colonizers with calculators, it calls them.
Provocative language.
Very. And Palantir enters as the mirror, offering this total view to states, funds, intel agencies, becoming the nervous system of the global market machine alongside ALADDIN. The source even connects this to Q-dropcoms, suggesting P might mean Palantir, the mirror, turned back on them.
And the claim is the dollar system was collapsing under revealed fraud, pushing BRICS towards alternatives outside the IMF cage.
Yes, the great reset they planned began resetting on them, because the truth about value belief, not just money, was exposed, according to this source.
So this whole degree 4 section paints the economy as a cathedral, faith as obedience to illusion, Palantir transcribing digital scripture, ALADDIN the oracle.
And institutional convergence, BlackRock, Vanguard, State Street, reinforcing the illusion of choice.
Plus, the claim about Israeli cyber scaffolding, Unit 8200, behind finance, linked to biotech, vaccine passports.
Right. And COVID framed again, not as an emergency, but a sacrament, ritualizing the system's death resurrection in programmable form. Mail-in ballots as bloodletting for control.
Citing LIBOR as a blueprint for reality distortion, the BIS as a cloister, people taught to tithe via inflation, repent via austerity.
Fear via credit scores. SDRs as scripture, weave writing hymns, Sepagavi organizing liturgies, merging health and equity.
BlackRock redefining the priesthood, Vanguard State Street sanctifying indexation, Palantir reflecting it all.
The source sums it up as sacrificial economics, a cathedral built on consent and debt, a pyramid fed by war, virus, and fear, and claims the canon reveals who sanctified the lie, priced the fall, and offered the blood for control. That's the essence of Degree 4, according to this text.
Okay, let's move to Degree 5, the war machine, blood, data, and doctrine. If Degree 4 was finance as a weapon, what's Degree 5 exposing?
Degree 5, according to this source, exposes the architects behind the rituals. Those who engineered obedience systems through currency, yes, but also wars and behaviors. It claims Palantir profiled entire populations for predictive obedience, knowing not just what you did, but what you would do.
And designing systems to ensure compliance before resistance was even thought of.
That's the claim, designing compliance in advance.
So here, finance meets warfare, AI meets psyops, compliance is traded like currency. The theater of war was always a ledger.
Yes, exactly. The source claims that since 2001, Palantir and its offshoots were embedded in U.S. military strategy. Counterinsurgency, drone kill chains, biometric surveillance in Afghanistan, Iraq. The battlefield went digital, basically. Projects like Nexus 7, Nexus 22 supposedly fuse behavioral data with intel, making decisions by algorithm.
And the source makes that really striking claim the battlefield wasn't just over there, it was domestic.
Precisely. It calls the war on terror a Trojan horse for installing permanent control logic domestically. TSA for conditioning, DHS restructuring governance into distributed intelligence, the Patriot Act, a constitutional detonation. That's the framing.
And Palantir provided the lens, BlackRock funded the debt, the taxpayer was the sacrificial offering. That's the source's picture.
Degree 5 also talks about psychological operations became economic policy, coordination between military intel and global behavioral economics. It mentions Cass Sunstein's nudge units, the UK's behavioral insights team. It even controversially links alleged CIA MKultra adjacent tech to things like woke ideology, claiming these techniques were redirected to manage mass sentiment.
And the bond between central banks, pharma, media, defense contractors became inseparable, the source claims.
Right, and COVID-19 wasn't the only coordinated war game, it alleges, but the crucial proof of concept for global obedience as a service.
Obedience as a service, that's quite a phrase.
It is. The source suggests you could steal it. It argues compliance became the currency through ESG DEI scores, digital ID trials, algorithmic risk scoring, behavioral conformity was monetized, it claims, and BlackRock Vanguard investments moved behavior. Every war, pandemic, protest, shortage was a calibration test. Degree 5, in this view, isn't about belief, it's about programming, and Palantir made it executable.
Then it gets into the military-industrial veil. The modern sword is code, metadata, predictive analytics.
Yeah. Palantir wasn't just software, but a classified backbone for military-grade cognition, evolving into a sovereign operator via contracts with Dudo, NATO, Five Eyes, Mossad, according to the source.
And the separation between military, industrial, and financial dissolved. BlackRock, Raytheon, Booz Allen, Lockheed, Palantir writing scripts for war and economies.
Simultaneously, that's the claim. ALADDIN optimized portfolios while Palantir mapped insurgents. And then the source claims insurgents came to include journalists, activists, populations flagged as risks to stability, meaning narrative compliance.
And that specific claim. The same nodes Palantir used for Afghan logistics were adapted for vaccine distribution, election modeling, civil unrest prediction in the U.S.
That's a major assertion in the source, yes. The same AI mapping IEDs maps sentiment clusters on X, behavioral nudges as digital counterinsurgency. The home front was reclassified as a battle space.
Tying into Cyber Command expansion, Palantir not just watching but shaping, feeding and feeding off U.S. Cyber Command, NATO Stratcom, DHS anti-disinfo partnerships.
Embedding with think tanks, NGOs, and foreign governments like Israel, NSO Group, Unit 8200, and China mirroring these operations, according to the source.
What's the deeper convergence it mentions here?
The source argues military targeting shifted from people with guns to people with influence. Influencers became instability nodes, online discourse, soft terrain, mean warfare, perception ops, pre-bunking as preemptive strikes.
So the line between kinetic and informational warfare just erased.
Completely erased in this view. The war machine no longer marched, but listened, modeled, predicted, then redirected your rage into digital cul-de-sacs. War became profitable and predictive, and Palantir held the map not just for bombs, but for where ideas ignited. That's degree 5, according to this source.
Okay, finally, degree 6. The captured sovereign nations as nodes. How does the source describe the system at this level? It sounds pretty far-reaching.
By degree 6, the source claims the pyramid no longer looks like government. It looks like software. Borders blurred, flags faded, leaders became spokesmodels for algorithms they couldn't read and treaties they didn't write.
Spokesmodels.
Yeah, nations weren't sovereign, but constructs within constructs. Vessels for upstream command. Sovereignty rewritten in code.
And Palantir wasn't just watching threats to nations, but redrawing the meaning of nation itself.
That's the core argument here, yes. Governments merged with corporate code bases, it claims. It highlights the Five Eyes alliance framework, saying Palantir embedded deeper, becoming a core nervous system in UK, NHS, border control welfare, Australia, immigration, biometrics, risk modeling, Israel linking again to Unit 8200, perception warfighting.
And that claim about the U.S. continuity of government protocols under Trump reactivated not just for safety, but to quietly route around a captured state with Palantir routing.
That's what the source alleges, yes.
Yeah.
A very specific claim about internal maneuvering. It also mentions programmable flows of finance, surveillance, identity management tested in places like Estonia, Ukraine, Singapore. The map reveals absorption, not erasure, of borders, international law limits determined by data, not law.
So Palantir held the mirror to the systems pretending to be nations. The nation state was already a managed simulation, according to this source.
And COVID, once again, is the trigger. Nations abandoning constitutional process for emergency decrees from predictive modeling. Mail-in ballots, behavioral nudges weren't local issues, but coordinated feature updates in a planetary system test.
Planetary system test?
Yeah, linking Vatican talk of global governance, WEF dry runs, to Palantir reading the end of the script.
Yeah.
The source implies if you can simulate collapse, you don't need to invade, just wait for the code to execute.
Chilling. Degree 6 also talks about ritual of risk financial weapons in the guise of aid. No accidents, but a pattern of debt, dependency, extraction in places like Ukraine, Sri Lanka, Argentina, Ghana.
That's the pattern the source claims exists.
Yeah.
And the alleged puppeteers, IMF, World Bank, USAID, NGOs, think tanks, foundations, every bailout a leech, every loan a binding spell, every agency an initiate in a ritual of strategic destabilization. Not aid, but directed demolition.
And if a nation resisted, assassinations, uprisings, media blitzes, color revolutions funded by shadow funds, State Department back channels, naming Open Society, Atlantic Council, NED.
Claiming they sang hymns of freedom while laying brakes for technocratic occupation. Strong language.
Very.
And post-2020, Palantir allegedly expanded into pandemic, logistics, immigration, foreign economic planning, using predictive modeling to chart vulnerable governments, swayable populations, PSYOP ROI. Not data analysis, the source insists, but psychological orchestration.
Citing examples like modeling crisis trajectories in Lebanon, humanitarian tools as surveillance in Ukraine, aid fused with biometric ID in South America for compliance maps.
Those are specific examples the source provides. And Gotham and Foundry are central again. Gotham feeding intel up, Foundry pulling decision-making into a predictive loop, leading to preemptive governance.
And ALADDIN and Gotham whispering to each other, capital OS and population OS.
That's the analogy the source uses. Data streams feeding each other. Investment shifted by projected compliance, social sentiment determined credit access, policy emerging from black box models. Calling ESGDI in this context colonial strategy and drag, the digitized priesthood of empire.
And Israel's role, Unit 8200 as the codex, Palantir deployments mirroring occupation strategy, create crisis, insert control, declare moral authority, monetize aftermath.
That's the controversial parallel the source draws, and it extends this logic. War on cash as war on sovereignty, climate war as war on energy independence, disinformation war as war on dissent, all fused by algorithmic liturgy, where charity-cloaked coercion risk mitigation was engineered collapse. Inversion as a service.
Every nation that fell scanned, logged, priced, compliance the commodity.
Exactly. And the final part of Degree 6 is corporate dominion and the precipice of revelation. Operators not in shadows, but broad daylight, under trusted logos. This dominion is the fusion of military, financial, tech, pharma empires. a synthetic godhead of managed reality.
Not one villain, but a living grid of interlocking influence, governed by predictive scripts, protected by engineered consent, listing BlackRock, Vanguard, Pfizer, Meta, Microsoft, Alphabet, Moderna, Goldman, Lockheed, Raytheon, Booz Allen, Accenture, Palantir as nodes.
Right. But the source stresses the structure matters more than the names. It sees the pandemic as a synthetic war game, election fraud as narrative insurance, social platforms passports as a planned test for digital dominion, driven not just by profit but by position.
And through it all, Palantir is described as omnipresent, connective tissue, brainstem, third rail, mapping NGOs, cross-seeding boards, IV Israel pipelines, spiritual architecture in Shell's ESG.
Masons in digital robes casting spells in data is the source's metaphor.
Wow, it claims the logos was inverted here, but also that this is where the fracture begins. Why? Why does the source say it's breaking?
Because the script has been too clean, operations too coordinated, performance too precise, according to this source. It claims subroutines are breaking, timelines collapsing, optics no longer hold. The system is mutating, desperate to maintain grip.
But something slipped through, something they couldn't model, track, or predict. Not a whistleblower leak or document.
It's framed as a question, the source claims. A question arising from the breakdown itself. Who wrote the code behind the code?
Wow. Okay. That was an incredibly dense and complex deep dive into degrees 4 through 6 of the Palantir Canon, based purely on the narrative in the source material you provided.
We really explored this source's specific claims, didn't we? How it presents finance as a weapon via ALADDIN and Palantir.
How warfare went digital and domestic.
How nations are framed as just nodes in a coded system.
And this idea of a corporate dominion operating through these intertwined empires.
Yeah, it's a very detailed and sometimes pretty provocative narrative the source lays out, describing this cathedral of control built on debt and consent, as it puts it.
And the source argues consistently that what looks like innovation is priestcraft. Progress is prophecy written in data.
Modeled by algorithms, yeah. That's the core argument running through these degrees.
And it leaves us with this thought that the system it describes is fracturing somehow, and a question is emerging that the system itself couldn't predict.
Right. This source poses that final, really provocative thought for you to chew on. In a system increasingly run by algorithms and data models, who wrote the code behind the code?
That is definitely a lot to think about, and we've only really scratched the surface of what this source claims, even just in part 2.
Absolutely. There's always more to explore, and looking at different sources like this, well, it helps us navigate the sheer amount of information out there, doesn't it?
Keep diving deep, keep asking questions. We'll be here to help unpack the sources you bring to us.